Your mind learned very early that thinking equals safety. That if you keep analyzing, anticipating, replaying, and simulating, you can somehow stay ahead of pain, embarrassment, loss, or uncertainty. Over time, this constant mental activity stopped feeling optional and started feeling necessary. Silence began to feel dangerous. Stillness felt irresponsible. And rest felt like a mistake you hadn't justified yet. But this is the illusion. The mind mistakes movement for protection, activity for intelligence, noise for control. In reality, most of what you call thinking isn't problem-solving at all. It's a survival reflex that never learned how to turn itself off. A habit formed in moments when being alert really did matter, but carried forward into a life where it no longer serves you. The cost of this habit is subtle at first. You don't collapse, you don't burn out dramatically. You simply feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. You feel mentally full, but oddly disconnected. Your head is busy, yet your life feels distant, like you're always watching it from behind glass. That's because non-stop thinking doesn't keep you connected to reality. It slowly replaces it. Most people believe they are conscious because their mind is always talking. But awareness is not noise. Awareness is quiet. Thinking narrates experience. Awareness experiences it directly. And when the narration never stops, you stop noticing what's actually happening. You don't hear the room anymore. You hear your commentary about it. You don't feel emotion. You hear a story explaining why it's happening. You don't live moments. You analyze them as they pass. This is why overthinking feels exhausting in a way that isn't dramatic, but deeply draining. Your system is constantly processing representations of life instead of life itself. And the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to remember that another way of being exists. The mind resists silence because silence removes its sense of control. Thinking is the mind's attempt to manage the future, to predict outcomes, to reduce uncertainty, to build certainty out of imagination. But the future cannot be controlled from inside your head, and on some level, your nervous system knows this. That's why the more you think, the less settled you feel. Planning turns into looping. Preparation turns into anxiety, and clarity never arrives. Uncertainty triggers the mind like a threat, and once triggered, it produces thought compulsively, not because the thoughts are useful, but because the body is on alert. The mind is responding to a state, not a problem. That's the truth most people miss. You cannot calm the mind without calming the body. You can reason all you want. You can tell yourself everything is fine. You can try to think positively. But if your nervous system is tense, your thoughts will remain loud. Mental noise is not an intellectual issue. It's a physiological one. A stressed body creates a noisy mind. A safe body creates a quiet one. This is why peace never comes from thinking your way into it. It comes when the body registers that it no longer needs to stay on guard, when breathing slows, when muscles release, when vigilance softens. Only then does the mind follow. And when it does, something unexpected happens. Thoughts don't disappear, they lose authority. You begin to notice that thoughts arise on their own, that they repeat, that they comment, predict, judge, warn. But instead of automatically believing them, you see them. And the moment a thought is seen clearly, it changes. Not because you fought it, but because you stepped out of it. This is the observer shift. When you stop identifying with thought, suffering decreases without effort. Anxiety weakens. Fear loses urgency. Doubt becomes information instead of identity. You realize that you are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness noticing it. This distance is everything. It doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You no longer react to every mental impulse as if it were a command. You choose, you pause, you respond. And in that space, freedom appears. Most mental suffering comes not from the content of thought, but from identification with it, from believing that every thought is you, about you, and requires action. Once that belief loosens, the mind can function as a tool again, not a place you live. And life starts to pull you back into itself. You notice how much meaning, clarity, and connection exist outside the mind. In sensation, in presence, in experience, in simple engagement with what's actually happening. Thinking fades naturally when living resumes. This is why people feel most alive when they're fully immersed in something real. Movement, conversation, creation, nature, love, flow. In those moments, the mind goes quiet not because it was forced to, but because it's no longer needed. The danger is subtle. Thinking can replace living so slowly that you don't notice the trade. Days pass, then months, then years, lived mostly in your head, rehearsing futures that never arrive, analyzing pasts that cannot be changed. Presence restores what thinking steals. And here's the final truth most people are never told. The mind is not meant to be inhabited. It's meant to be used. Thought is a tool, powerful, necessary, and limited. When it's used appropriately, it serves you. When it becomes your home, it imprisons you. There are moments that require thinking, and moments that require stepping out of it entirely. This isn't about rejecting the mind. It's about putting it back in its rightful place. You don't need to think constantly to be safe. You don't need to analyze everything to be prepared. You don't need mental noise to be conscious. You are allowed to be here. And when you finally stop treating thinking as a place to live, something softens. The pressure eases. The world feels closer. And for the first time in a long while, your mind rests. Not because it was silenced, but because it was no longer needed to protect you from life. You were never meant to think your way through existence. You were meant to be in it. There's a subtle shift that happens once you realize your mind doesn't need to be running commentary on your existence. At first, it feels unfamiliar, almost like you've forgotten something important. The silence can feel empty, even wrong. That's because for a long time, noise was your reference point. You associated thinking with engagement, vigilance with responsibility, and mental effort with being a serious person. But silence isn't absence, it's capacity. When the mind quiets, you don't disappear, you arrive. You start noticing how much of your previous tension came from trying to manage life internally instead of meeting it directly. You see how often your thoughts were rehearsals for conversations that never happened, defenses against judgments that were never spoken, or preparations for futures that never arrived. None of that activity actually protected you. It only kept your nervous system perpetually braced. This is why stillness can feel unsafe at first. Your system learned to equate constant thinking with vigilance. So when thought slows, the body doesn't immediately relax. It checks for danger. That's normal. Silence is unfamiliar, not threatening. Over time, as nothing bad happens, the system learns something new. Presence is safe. And once safety is felt, not reasoned, something remarkable occurs. Your attention returns to the present moment without effort. You begin to sense life again instead of narrating it. You feel the texture of experience, the weight of your body, the rhythm of your breath, the tone of a room, the emotional undercurrent of a conversation. These are things thinking can never replace, only obscure. This is where clarity actually lives. Clarity doesn't come from having more thoughts. It comes from fewer distortions. And most distortions are created by mental noise layered on top of simple reality. When that noise quiets, decisions become cleaner, not easier, cleaner. You see what fits and what doesn't without needing to justify it internally. The mind hates this at first because it loses its monopoly on authority. It will try to pull you back with questions, doubts, and hypothetical scenarios. It will say, "But what if? You should think about this more. You're being careless." This isn't wisdom, it's habit. The mind is trying to reassert relevance in a system that no longer needs constant commentary. You don't have to fight this. You just have to notice it. The moment a thought is seen as a thought, not a command, it softens. The urgency drops. And over time, the mind learns a new role. It stops trying to run your life and starts supporting it when needed. This is where thinking becomes useful again. Instead of constant simulation, thought becomes intentional. You think when there's something to think about. You plan when there's something to plan. You reflect when reflection serves growth. And when it doesn't, you step out of thought naturally. This flexibility is what most people mistake for discipline, when it's actually awareness. And awareness changes your relationship with everything. You stop over-identifying with emotion because you see how quickly states change. You stop panicking when discomfort arises because you no longer interpret it as a problem that must be solved immediately. You allow experiences to move through you instead of freezing them into stories. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you responsive. There's a profound difference between reacting from thought and responding from presence. Reaction is fast but blind. Response is calm and precise. Reaction is driven by habit. Response is informed by reality. When presence leads, your actions align more easily with what actually matters. You waste less energy. You say less but mean more. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You trust your internal signals because they're no longer drowned out by mental static. This is why people who are deeply present feel grounded without trying. Their calm isn't performative, it's structural. Their system isn't overloaded. Their attention isn't fragmented. They're not living 3 steps ahead of themselves. They're here. And life responds differently to someone who is here. Conversations deepen. Opportunities clarify. Problems simplify. Not because life has changed, but because interpretation has. When you're not lost in thought, you stop amplifying uncertainty. You stop feeding fear with imagination. You meet situations as they are, not as your mind predicts they might be. This is also where trust begins to rebuild. Not blind trust in outcomes, but trust in your capacity to meet whatever arises. When you're no longer trapped in mental rehearsal, you realize something important. You've handled uncertainty before. You've adapted. You've survived moments you couldn't think your way through. Presence carried you then, even if you didn't recognize it. And they can carry you now. The mind doesn't like this realization because it undermines its primary argument. You need me to stay safe. But safety doesn't come from prediction. It comes from adaptability. And adaptability lives in awareness, not analysis. Once you see this, the compulsion to think weakens naturally. You don't need to suppress thoughts. You don't need to force silence. You simply stop feeding the loop with belief and urgency. And like any system deprived of fuel, it slows. Life becomes less about figuring out and more about engaging. You engage with what's in front of you instead of what might be ahead. You listen instead of preparing responses. You move when movement is required and rest when it isn't. You stop living in abstraction and return to experience. This is where meaning returns. Not the conceptual kind, but the felt kind. The kind that doesn't need explanation. The kind that shows up as a sense of rightness, even when things are challenging. When you're present, meaning isn't something you search for. It's something you recognize. And gradually, the identity you built around being a thinker loosens. You realize you don't need to be mentally active to be valuable. You don't need constant opinions to be intelligent. You don't need internal commentary to be aware. What you need is availability, not to thoughts, but to life. That availability changes everything. Because when you're available, you notice opportunities sooner. You sense misalignment before it becomes burnout. You feel when something is off without needing to justify it. You act with timing instead of urgency. This is why people who live from presence seem to move at the right moment. They're not guessing. They're listening. Listening to their body. Listening to the situation. Listening to the subtle signals thinking can't detect. And the more you trust this mode of being, the less you fear silence. Silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling spacious. A place where life can reach you without interference. You don't disappear when thinking stops. You emerge. This isn't about becoming calm all the time. It's about no longer mistaking mental noise for consciousness. It's about remembering that awareness existed before thought and will remain after it. Thinking will always be available when needed, but you don't need to live there. You're allowed to step out of your head. You're allowed to rest in experience. You're allowed to be here without narrating it. And when you do, something very simple becomes clear. Life doesn't require constant thought to be lived fully. It requires presence. The mind was never meant to be your home. It was meant to be your tool. And the moment you stop living inside it, you finally return to the only place life has ever been happening. Right here.